Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second in our four-part series on Universal Design for Learning. We are joined again today with Amanda and Melissa from the CAST Institute, or CAST. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. All the attendees are again in listen-only mode. So if you have questions, we invite you to post those questions in the question box. If you would like to be unmuted, if we have an opportunity, you can raise your hand and be unmuted. I want to kind of point out a couple other things in the handouts. We have some handouts for today, as well as there is the bit.ly right there on the screen, and all those materials were sent to you ahead of time, so you do have those with you. If you have any additional questions, let us know. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor over to Melissa. So good morning, good afternoon. We're in afternoon today.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So I want to first, before I switch the slide, point out that we have a bit.ly, and that bit.ly, if you type that into where the URL goes in your computer, you'll have a view version of the slide deck, and you can just follow along with us there if you'd like to do that, or you can make your own copy and take notes in it, whatever serves you. And Amanda is going to be helping in the chat today. We'll be interacting a little bit there, and also Amanda and I will be interacting on the screen. And so we're ready to roll. You ready, Amanda?
Absolutely. I added the bit.ly to the chat, so if anyone needs it, they can click on it there.
And Amanda and I are most used to Zoom. So when we're saying chat, we're meaning the questions area. So those two things, like, just think of those as interchangeable, because that's we say that almost 100 times a day. So we're used to saying in the chat. So my name is Melissa Sanjay. I am an implementation specialist with CAST, and what we do as implementation specialists is we travel around the country, and most recently around the state of New Hampshire, and we help school leaders, school teams, and teachers implement UDL in their school environments. And I have with me Amanda.
Hi guys, I'm Amanda Bastoni, and before coming to CAST, I was a CTE teacher and a CTE director, and now I work in the workforce area, workforce development at CAST, and continue to speak at CTE conferences and write articles about CTE, and really excited about the work that UDL can do to support CTE educators.
Great, thank you, Amanda. So to get us started with our question box, we wanted to just get used to using that. So if you could put into that question box, what's your role, what do you teach, and then from a 1 to a 4, how well do you know UDL? And we're thinking 1 is not at all, 2 somewhat, 3 maybe I had a training or 2, I read a book, and then 4 I could write a book, that you could join the CAST team in our CAST publishing and write a book. So take a minute and test out that chat, make sure you can ask your questions and let us know kind of where everyone's coming from. And welcome back to the people that we talked to on Wednesday. So I hope everybody's doing well. We wanted to start off with, if you weren't with us on Wednesday, we wanted to start off with a tiny bit of a review of what UDL is. We're not gonna spend too much time on it, because this webinar is really intended to be about how to use the UDL design process. So that's the goal of this webinar, is how can I use the UDL and the UDL design process and lessons. But for those of you that weren't with us on Wednesday, I just want to review the underpinnings of UDL and how we came to where we are. So the first underpinning of UDL is the definition. So UDL is an approach to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all by setting clear and rigorous goals, anticipating barriers to those goals, and then proactively designing to minimize those barriers. And we're going to go over that sort of definition. In that definition is the design process, and so we'll go over that step by step today. One of the first core concepts of UDL is that the barrier is in the environment, not the learner. So we try to take our lens and we shift it from individual learners to the environment and that design of those lessons and that lesson plan, and where are the barriers for students, and how can we remove those barriers by embedding options and choices and different routes towards the goal. Our second core concept comes from neuroscience. So CAST has done a lot of research in cognitive psychology, neuropsychology, neurocognition. And so from that research, one of the core concepts we've come up with is variability is the norm. There's no average brain. Every brain is different, just like our fingerprints. In addition to that variability being the norm, we also know that people are different depending on their context. So as you move from brick and mortar classrooms to remote classrooms, you might have different tendencies or different strengths in each of those contexts. So people are variable between people, but also within themselves, depending on the context. And then the last underpinning of UDL is that this variability is predictable in learning, and it can be designed for, because when we think about every single brain is different, it kind of can become overwhelming. But what CAST has done is done enough research so that we can see these patterns and where is variability predictable and how can we design for that. So before we get started, we wanted to give you a little bit of a UDL environment look. So this is what we try to do when we go out to workshops, is we say, we want to make this environment a UDL environment. So we want to give you options. So your options for self-regulation, especially if you're listening to this webinar, you can sit anywhere you want, you can stand, you can walk around with your computer, you can eat anytime. Some people want to gather fidgets because they want to kind of play with something to focus, or a paper to doodle. So take a minute to get that stuff together if you need that. You can follow along on the screen shared slides, or you can make that personal copy of the slides that I suggested, or you could even have these captions, follow along with these captions that should be projected on your screen. And in terms of opportunities to demonstrate your knowledge or build on your knowledge through action, there's the question box. You can doodle notes to yourself, and you can kind of, as I said, type in those speaker notes if you've made your own copy of the slides. This is the second in our 4 webinar series. The first one is recorded and should be on your platform. The second one is today, and it is UDL in practice. And on May 13th, which is next Wednesday, we'll have a guest, and Amanda will be leading us in UDL in a virtual environment. And our guest is Sam Johnson, who also works for CAST. And then a week from today, we'll do one specifically on UDL and CTE, and Amanda will be leading us through that. So anything we need to know about before we head in, Amanda? Anything going on in the
We have a lot of people saying they've come back, so that's exciting. We're really glad to have you back. Lots of folks who are involved with CTE, teachers, a lot of English language learner teachers. So just welcome back, everybody. It's fun to write to you and say, glad you're here again.
Yes, thank you. Welcome back. So this is the UDL design process. So the first, we sometimes call it the how. How can I do this? So now I know why I should be doing it. How can I do it? The first thing we want to let people know is it's an iterative process. Don't feel like you have to have, there's a perfect UDL lesson, there's a perfect design. What we all do in UDL is we plan, we try it out, we reflect on where the barriers were, reflect on how our options to reduce those barriers landed, and then we plan again. So it's this iterative process. It's never perfect. And we do the same thing with our webinars and with our workshops. We're always thinking, well, I think this way might work a little bit better, and we're tweaking along the way. The UDL design process has 3 steps. The first step is to set clear and rigorous goals. The second is to anticipate barriers to those goals. And the third is to design options to reduce those barriers. So when we think about setting clear and rigorous goals, we have this cartoon we sometimes look at. And for those of you that can't see it well, there's a lineup of many different animals. It looks like a seal, a fish, a dog, an elephant, a penguin, a monkey, and maybe a raven. And there's a man sitting at a big desk, and he says, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. So please climb that tree. And there's a tree behind the lineup of animals. So Amanda, have you seen this before?
Yeah, Melissa, first of all, I wanted to say we had a request to share the UDL on campus link. So I did share that in the chat for everyone. And I can share it again. That's going to be a useful link for anyone, but it was designed for college instructors and folks who work in higher ed. So this, it's funny, this cartoon I had blown up, Melissa, and was hanging on my door when I was a teacher so that all students who entered would see this.
Great.
And I think it really reiterates the points we're trying to make about UDL and how variability impacts students' ability to learn or to complete tasks or to demonstrate their knowledge. I always see this cartoon and think of a particular student. We had an automotive. I'll pretend his name was Tim, but I think everyone can think of this student. He would skip all his other classes, right? So English class he would skip, math class, and looking for him, he would always be in the auto lab with, the auto teacher. So eventually he was at risk for not graduating, and we said, let's just find a way to teach him English and math in the auto lab. And we were able to be very flexible and create some really flexible learning opportunities. But, some kids just shine in different environments, right? And we talked about that on Wednesday. So there you go.
Yeah. And when I look at this, when I look at this cartoon, I also think to myself, what is this person assessing, right? So your friend Tim, who was in automotive, he could have been demonstrating some of those skills from those other classes, it just in that context of automotive. So if this person at this desk wants to measure the animal's speed, maybe they could measure it in different ways besides climbing the tree. If they wanted to measure their agility, there could be more than one way to demonstrate agility than climbing the tree, especially the fish. The fish cannot climb the tree, but probably is agile in his own way. So that's why we use it for this idea of clear goal, flexible means. Another way that we like to think about it is if I were to say to everybody, you're going to get fit, and you're going to get fit by doing sit-ups. How many people are going to try to get fit with me with sit-ups? Amanda, would you join my gym if I'm like, this is a gym for sit-ups? It's all we're doing.
Yeah, no. So I bought a Peloton during COVID-19 because I felt like I was losing my mind. But I wasn't able to do, I'd struggle to run on my own. I would struggle to go to your gym doing sit-ups, but I have my own way that I can stay fit.
Yeah, so if I had a gym that just had sit-ups, that would limit the number of people who would try my gym. And so I have the goal of get fit, but it was missing those flexible means. So other ways that one can get fit, they could run, they could do yoga, they could do some strength training, or they could do some sit-ups. So that separates our means from our goals. Our goal is to get fit, and then we all have different ways to get to that goal. Yours, Amanda, is the Peloton. I prefer to swim. I like to swim, and it doesn't really feel like work if I'm swimming, whereas if I were to do sit-ups or run, that would feel like work. So that's a way that we look at the means versus the goals. So in our universally designed goals, another way to think about it is a GPS. So you can't say to Siri, hey Siri, take me somewhere. She has to know what the destination is. But once Siri knows the destination, then the means can be flexible. Maybe it could, you don't want to go on highways, so it'll take you the back road. Maybe you want to, maybe you don't want to pay for toll roads. It'll take you a different way. Or maybe you really, your goal in addition to getting to that location is speed. So then she will route the fastest way and take sort of some of that traffic take you around that traffic. So universally designed goals are flexible and they don't have the means embedded, and they're clear and discrete. So it's very clear as to what you're assessing. You're not assessing multiple things at multiple times. And we try to have our universal design goals remain rigorous. We want to have a rigorous goal because if we design in a way where the other barriers, the unnecessary barriers or unneeded barriers are removed, then everyone can get towards that rigorous goal. So we're going to try an example together, and we're going to use an example from CTE since many of you are involved with CTE. So Amanda helped us with this example. So our goal is that students will research and create a resume aimed at a career in manufacturing. And that, in talking with Amanda, that's a pretty common goal, isn't it, Amanda? It's something that you do a lot in CTE?
Yeah, I mean, we have Sean here, who's a culinary instructor. I'm sure he has to have his students do some work around creating a resume. It's definitely a requirement for those career-ready skills to be built into your courses.
So if we were to look at this goal from a UDL perspective, we really have two goals here. And so if a student might be good at researching, but they might not have, or they might know a lot about that content of career in manufacturing, but they might not be as good with the creation of the resume. So we separate out those two things so we can really assess where our students are. So if the goal is content, it would be students will demonstrate an understanding of the skills necessary for a job in manufacturing. So you pull out that resume piece. But if you're working on resume writing skills and that's your goal, then maybe students will create a resume and you just focus on that. And then you augment that resume later when you get to a place where it's time to add in those career specific skills.
Perfect.
So Amanda, now it's our turn. So we're going to try to rewrite these goals to make them more universally designed. So you want to read off our first one?
Yeah, so what we did is we were thinking about what are some common or what are some goals that CTE teachers might have in their classroom, and I'm going to offer them to Melissa, and she's going to help us kind of rework them. So Melissa, if maybe my task I'm asking students to do is to make a poster about how to take someone's blood pressure. What's your reflection on UDL from a UDL perspective?
So if I was trying to assess it, that my students knew how to take someone's blood pressure, then that would be the goal. We want to learn how to take someone's blood pressure. And then your ability to demonstrate your understanding of that goal could be multiple ways. You could make a poster. If you don't feel like you're a great artist, you could write me an essay. If you don't feel like you're a great writer, but you're an orator, then you could give me a PowerPoint presentation. Because what I really want to know is that you know how to take someone's blood pressure. If my goal was, if we were in an art class and my goal was that you know how to make a poster, maybe to engage that effective network and to get you really interested in the project, I'll teach you all the skills and the techniques that one might need for making a poster, but then allow you to pick your content, allow you to pick your subject.
Great. Okay, so what if I want my students to write a diagnostic observation about a car? So a car has been brought into the automotive shop and I'm telling them, okay, everybody, write down, what you think is wrong with this car, what sounds or noises it's producing. How could we look at that, Melissa, from a UDL perspective?
So you want to know that the students can listen to a car or observe a car and know what's wrong with it. So maybe instead of, they could write it, could be an option. Maybe they could write it in their home language and have it translated if a language is a barrier. Maybe they could tell you what's wrong with it. Maybe they could point it out. Those are different ways that they could do that. And then if you want them to work on the skill of writing, because in some career technology education, there's some skills that you kind of have to build up in order to participate in those fields. Then maybe you could give them some scaffolding for the writing. You could have a graphic organizer and kind of show them how to organize their observations. And they can observe other things. They could practice that observation on things other than a car. They could practice it on their home environment or something like that before they put those two things together, that skill and that knowledge.
Yeah, great. Good, Melissa. Okay. So I have not had my hair done in a while. Thank you, COVID-19. But I used to have it done at the cosmetology students used to do it when I was directing in Nashua. So let's say I wanted to see if the students could, use hair dye properly, and I'm going to ask them to recite the steps. Would you have any suggestions around designing that from a UDL perspective?
Yeah, so we want them to know what the steps are for dyeing hair. So I don't think it's necessary for them to have to recite them if they're afraid of being in public or something like that. So maybe they can make that poster, maybe they can write those down, maybe they can video. So some kids have a fear of being physically in front of people, but they don't mind talking to a camera. So they could video themselves even reciting those steps. And one thing I should say that I was going to say, I forgot to, but a UDL move that we might do in a webinar like this is to say, we're going to talk through these goals. But if you want to pause if you want to turn off the sound and work on them yourself, feel free to do that. So for the last one, if you want to ignore Amanda and I, and you want to rewrite it yourself, you can rewrite it in the chat, you can rewrite it on paper. But I just want to say that because I was going to say that for the whole activity and then I forgot.
It's okay. And I'd love to know, Melissa, too, if folks have other thoughts and they want to pop them in the chat. It's so fun to be communicating. There's a woman, Angie, who's on here that I know fairly well, and I'm excited to have her with us today. So it's just nice to be getting to know everyone. So if you do want to share your thoughts on rewriting these, or if you have questions, please pop those in the chat. So, okay, you have a group of students working, group of 4, and you ask them, you're trying to think of ways to keep the lab safe and make this an exciting activity, funny activity. So can they do a skit on what happens if you're not wearing proper safety attire in the woodshop lab?
Yes. So some students, you're kind of combining the skills of drama, right? And then the content of safety. So maybe they can show you that content, as we've been saying throughout all of this, show you that content in many different ways. Performing a skit is sometimes engaging for some kids. So some kids have that dramatic flair and they want to do that. Or maybe they could work by themselves. They could work in a group. They can do a speech. They can write a paper. But I would give them a choice of both groupings or independently, and a choice of kind of how they're going to demonstrate that knowledge.
Great. And Melissa, we want to keep in mind, we do have a lot of language learner teachers here. So anytime we also have an example to help them understand how UDL could be useful, I think would be awesome.
Yeah. And you mentioned when we were talking about this yesterday, Amanda, you mentioned bringing some of those Google Translate tools into your labs and Nashua. And so that's something that you could also allow students to, especially if you're just assessing the knowledge of the hair dye steps, the knowledge of the safety. If you allow them to express that in their home language and then have Google Translate it so you can make sure they know what they're doing. And other things that we can do in terms of English language learners is if we know the terms, we can label the tools in both languages. We can have picture dictionaries with a picture of the tool and then the word in English that people can quickly refer to as people are learning English as they are also taking CTE courses.
Yeah, and I think, Melissa, really the takeaway here is, for me, from the CTE director perspective, was also, thinking about how to make sure that we're assessing what we were trying to teach. And I had a teacher one time after I introduced UDL and he was using it for a while say, oh, now I understand how when I was assigning students to write essays about safety, I was really testing them on their essay writing skills. They were getting nervous about spelling and they were focusing on grammar. And really what I wanted to know is, could they be safe in the lab? So what I hear you saying is when we give multiple options to demonstrate understanding of safety, we are better able to assess if those students understand safety. We're not just assessing whether they can write an essay or whatever.
Yeah, and from what you've expressed from your experience, the sooner you get them into that lab, the more engaged they are, right? So you want to kind of break down those barriers to getting them into the lab and getting them hands-on. So, Amanda, is there any concerns about rigor when we think about this? Do you want to?
Yes, I would like to talk about that, Melissa. And actually, we already had that question. So when Melissa and I were prepping for this webinar, we were going through it and practicing and getting ready. And I said, I'm assuming there'll be a question around licensing. So in CTE, we have certain licenses, and someone in the audience asked, industrial licenses. Laura actually asked about the CNA, LNA testing. How can we really modify? We can't modify those tests, or we can't, adjust them or give options. So, maybe that's the rigor. So how can UDL help students if, we don't have control over that? So that's a thing to start thinking about,
Yeah, and we have this question a lot too with standardized tests, even if we're just speaking to a room full of English teachers or a room full of math teachers. There's this question of how is this going to prepare my students for standardized tests? So first, before we get there, we like to talk about like what really is rigor. So in CAS view of rigor doesn't mean hard and it doesn't mean difficult. It doesn't mean inaccessible. what it really means is learners are making meaning for themselves. So they're taking the information in and they're making their own meaning. They're doing the thinking. They're imposing the structure onto their learning. They're integrating their new skills into the thinking process. And then they're applying the new learning across context. So when we separate that content from that goal, from that skill, what we're doing is we're allowing them to practice them independently. So then when it does come time to, in an English class case, to I have to write an essay about a topic I don't care about, if they've first practiced getting information from content that they care about or writing essays about things that they care about, then when they put those two things together, then they're better able to exercise that skill. And so the same might be true of CNA. If you have, if you give them many routes to take in that content, to learn that information that they then are going to need to access to answer a multiple choice test or write an essay, and then also have them practice essays on things that they really are interested in that content, then hopefully when the time comes to put those two things together, that's going to be a smoother process for them.
Absolutely, and I think that's really true, and is often very true when we're thinking about supporting English language learners, right? So if we can help with language acquisition in environments that are hands-on and tangible and they're excited to be in, it can really build that skill development.
Yeah. And the goal of all of this stuff of UDL is to build what we're calling expert learners. And you should have in your handouts that expert learner graphic that you see on the screen. But we're doing all of these things. And if you look at the UDL guidelines and the green part of the guidelines, we're doing all those things to help build students who are purposeful and motivated. And we do the things in the purple to help students become resourceful and knowledgeable. And then in the blue, for students to become strategic and goal directed. So this graphic is kind of a description of what an expert learner might look like. And so we use these guidelines, these UDL guidelines, to not only increase accessibility, to make the material accessible to all learners, and we do that by increasing options towards a specific goal, but we also do it because we want to find places where we can increase that rigor, where we can find places for students to be independent and increase their opportunity through choices. So if I have a choice of, am I going to do a poster, or am I going to write a paper, or am I going to do a oral presentation, then that has a little bit of rigor there. I'm imposing my structure. I'm making meaning for myself, and I'm putting it into the context that works for me. So we want to just take a breath, breathe in, breathe out, and reflect about what might resonate so far, what works in the context. Do you have any CTE reflections to share or anything coming through the chat, Amanda?
Well, we have, it's great, it's really fun to see everyone kind of weighing in. People were giving some ideas about, alternatives to the lessons that we were talking about, drawing a cartoon, making a PSA, really some very, very creative ideas about ways to offer students alternatives to demonstrating understanding. So I think that's excellent. One last thing I wanted to reflect on, Melissa, was one of the goals in CTE is really to build that independence. So expert learner, when we think about CTE, we want to increase students so that they can be successful, in industry, right? So that they can go on work-based learning sites, and so they can go on internships. And I think that the expert learner is kind of like the learner who can go out and do things independently. So I think in CTE, we're always sort of naturally trying to get students to that level. I think what UDL offers is a framework to do that work.
Yeah, that's great. So the goal is so important, because when you go into designing, you want to make sure you have your handle on that goal, because sometimes you can start designing and you can design away your goal. So if my goal has to do with writing, I can't give an option other than writing. So that's why we start with the goal, and we kind of focus on that hard to say we have to know exactly what we're doing, because there are going to be so many routes to that goal. We have to know exactly what we're doing before we start routing those routes. And then there's a blank slide, and I'm not sure why. Oh, here we go.
So we can breathe again. We've all been on so many webinars, right, Melissa? I know that like everyone is excited to be here and we're excited to be here, but you know, it's a lot of webinars lately.
It's a lot of webinars, yes. So what that was really is it was animation. Sometimes things are animated and I forget they're animated. So it was like I had to click a bunch. But when we talk about anticipating barriers, we want to think back to those brain networks that we talked about a little bit at the end of the last webinar. The engagement network, which is the network of the brain. It's in the middle of the brain. It monitors our emotions. It sets our priorities. And it is kind of our interests, where our interest lies. So it's what we sometimes call the why of learning, but it's also how will students engage. So thinking about, we have this goal, what are the barriers to engagement and what can I do about that? Then we think about representation, which is the back of the brain where I take in my information and where I turn it into usable knowledge. So when we think about barriers and representation, what are some barriers to how students perceive this information? And one of the guidelines in representation is language and symbols. So when you're thinking about this English language learners, what are some things that I can do to help English language learners perceive this information, take it in, and turn it into usable knowledge? And then the front of the brain, action and expression guideline, where we monitor our plans, we're purposeful in our actions. And so we think about this when we think about how can our students act upon their understanding once they understand that content or they've developed that skill, how can they demonstrate that understanding to us? So we designed a small little lesson, and we want to think about what might be the barriers in this lesson among those three networks. How might people have barriers to engagement, representation, and action and expression? So our CTE lesson, do you want to take us through this lesson, Amanda?
Sure. And I just wanted to say that folks are really appreciating, Melissa, the way we defined, or you really defined rigor. I think oftentimes rigor is really interpreted as just something that's more difficult, you know, and I'm glad that you really took the time to define that, and folks are really weighing in that they appreciate that. So, okay. So, you know, take this with a grain of salt. We're just trying to make a generalized lesson plan so that we can think about how to, think about it from a UDL framework. So, but I have seen folks do something very similar to this in CTE classroom. So our goal is to understand safe laboratory procedures. So here's the method or material or approach that we'll be taking. Students will independently watch a video, and maybe because they're in remote learning, they're going to watch this video independently, and then they will know how to use XX. So fill in, you know, it could be biotechnology lab, it could be culinary lab, it could be woodworking, safely. So we're asking the students to watch this video, take notes and study, and then tomorrow they're going to have a 20-question test on lab safety procedures. And if they miss any of the questions, they're going to have to retake the quiz until they get all the answers correct. And you won't be able to use any of the lab equipment until you can pass this quiz safely. And Melissa, did you want me to tell the story of where this kind of came from, or?
Yeah, and while you tell that story, if folks have an option, they can, if they have the inclination, think about what a barrier might be to this and stick it in that question box, and we'll read them off before we go on to the next slide. But yes, I really love that story, so I want you to tell everybody.
So my husband is a manufacturing woodshop teacher, and he offers more choice now, but when he first started, he was very concerned with safety, totally understandably. And he said, Amanda, on every piece of equipment, I asked the students to take a 10 question test, because we have 10 fingers, and they have to get 100% on the test, because we have 10 fingers, and if they miss one, then they get a 90. That's not good enough, because it's like their finger got cut off, right? And we don't want to lose any fingers, so we want to get 10 out of 10 on all our safety equipment.
Do you have any barriers coming in?
Yeah, so how do I take notes, right? This isn't explained well here.
Mm-hmm.
There is no option to ask questions or discuss or get deeper learning. What about a student needs to share? What if a student had to share a computer, right? Or had poor internet connectivity? Jeff is saying a barrier might be that the student has poor internet and can't watch the video. Beth is weighing in, dyslexic students will not be able to do this without an audio aid to help them read. Really insightful, Beth. Students may have test anxiety. Absolutely. Test anxiety again, Amy, great. There is no option to ask questions, right? Yeah, good. So those are some of the answers that we've had come in so far.
Great. So some of the preloaded answers we put in is, I heard people talk about that video, and the video is the only means to get the content knowledge. So could it be a video and a one-pager? Could it be talking to the teacher? A lot of people talked about that we can't have a discussion. Someone came up with that second bullet, specific executive functioning skills around studying are not supported or taught. How am I supposed to study? How am I supposed to take notes? The instructions and video, the assumption is that they were only provided in English. And there's only one way to demonstrate that I understand the content. So that's where that test anxiety comes in, right? So I can only take this test. I can't just walk through with my shop teacher and show my shop teacher that I know, my wood shop teacher, that I know every single part of this machine and I know how not to get my fingers cut off. Could be a way to demonstrate the understanding that might even be more authentic than that quiz. So not only is that a barrier to action and expression when we talk about demonstrating my understanding, but it's also a barrier to engagement, because in engagement we talk a lot about relevance. So how is this relevant? And sitting with a piece of paper and a pen is not super relevant to the actual practice of working with a machine. And then academic language was not necessarily defined. So the video might have tools, names, and that sort of thing, and there was no support to define that academic language. So those are some of the barriers that you guys came up with, and some additional ones that we found.
Right, absolutely. And then, some folks are weighing in that if the video doesn't have closed captioning, that can be difficult, makes for some students. And then really this idea, and Melissa, you brought this up too, is a test the best way to demonstrate that you know how to use a piece of equipment safely? Maybe if you could just show that you can safely use it, that might be the best way. So.
Yeah. So when we talk about barriers, we often talk about options at the same time. It's pretty natural to say, well, the video is a barrier, so I'm going to give them a text. I'm going to give them this. But when we take that second step of the UDL design process, we grab those UDL guidelines and we say, okay, I know language is going to be a barrier. So then I'm going to go to that guideline, language and symbols, and I'm going to look for things that are going to help me build options. So I might build some options around language and symbols into the design with some charts or some graphic organizers or some other languages, have the instructions and additional languages to reduce that barrier to language acquisition being the barrier. So when we design options to minimize barriers, as I said, we take them along those three categories in UDL of engagement, representation, and action expression. And some starter UDL sort of moves for engagement is maybe choice of topic, choice of relevant texts. When you think about CTE, maybe it can be choice of like parts of the car. What other choices do you think can happen in CTE, Amanda, when you think about engagement and engaging learners?
Yeah, well, so if you're teaching, wood shop, you could give a choice of what kind of project. So the project would have a goal, right, to learn to use maybe the bandsaw safely or the lathe safely. Mm-hmm. But you don't necessarily have to have everyone making the same project, possibly. Another choice I've seen in biotechnology is we all need to learn how to do research and to create our own experiment, but do we all have to do the same experiment? No, we can have some choice about what experiment and what kind of research we want to do. So, and the last thing I want to say is in each of our cluster groups within CTE, there are definitely different jobs, right? So a person might be in a video class, but they might really love editing. So could we have them research the skills that go into becoming a professional editor? Someone else might be researching the skills that go into becoming a professional videographer, right? So there's choice that you can give students, even though they're still demonstrating the same understanding.
Great. And we've talked a little bit about representation. So some UDL moves for representation is to read aloud some things for students, have them have a digital copy that they can manipulate and highlight. You can record on this thing called Vocaroo. It's a web-based application, and it will record you for free and then give you a unique URL. So if you have some students, or you think that some students on any certain day might prefer to listen than to read, and reading isn't the goal, then you can record on Vocaroo. And are there some things that you use in CTE, Amanda, for, can you have Spanish language options for things, or
Yeah.
other languages?
Yeah, and I talked about this last time, but in one of our classes, we did all of our safety videos. We had some Spanish-speaking students help us, and we made safety videos in Spanish, and then they translated in English, and we put those on YouTube so teachers had access to them. I do want to just acknowledge that all the things we're saying are really ideas for just designing better. So, not necessarily, because what's coming up is that time is an issue, right? If we try to do all these things, Melissa, can feel time consuming for teachers. So maybe you've had this question before, maybe you just want to address that a little bit.
Yeah, so that's actually coming up on our next slide, that UDL is not a checklist. You just infuse UDL based on the goal, and it depends on your context. So small changes make a big difference. So maybe you just choose one thing. Maybe you choose to, if you have a guiding textbook, you choose to find that textbook in a different language, or you choose to find an audio version of that textbook. But little small changes make a big difference. Other things that the teachers find is that they can start to set these UDL routines. So that maybe the routine is, you always have, if it's content is our goal, you always have a choice of an oral presentation, a paper, or a poster. And that's always the same. I want to back us up just for a second to think about the action and expression. So that's what we've talked a lot about, is that, can I do a podcast? Can I do an infographic? Can I do a graphic organizer? So those are like some starter UDL moves for that. And as we say, it's a process. You plan, you try one thing, see if it goes better, and then you reflect on it and you plan again. And you'll probably get some, especially CTE teachers that are working with older students, I'm sure you'll get some willingness to give you some feedback on what went well and what didn't go well with some of those older students.
Yeah, and Melissa, one thing that just came in that was great was teacher Christina said, having the students help brainstorm the assessments. What a great idea, right?
Yeah, that is a great idea. And sometimes teachers get so far along with UDL that they have some students co-design. So they're building other skills by co-designing with teachers. Great. So when we're talking about all these options, we'd like to highlight that the power of options is that the options give the learners choice, but then when they're making those choices, that builds their agency, and then the agency is what builds that expert learning that we talked about: purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal directed. So is there anything coming in the chat that we should address before we look at this next video, Amanda?
I just want to say that a lot of comments around that having that 10 question pass rate is pretty restrictive, and I just want to say, he has a different approach now, and I think that's important. We, a lot of folks here just sharing more barriers that they were finding and seeing, and maybe a lack of interest too can be a barrier in itself. And I think that's where UDL really comes in. Is sometimes it can happen that a student is displaying that they aren't interested, right, Melissa? And really it's coming from they're not able to access the learning. We don't know why, or we don't realize that they can't access it. So I think it can look different, and I think UDL can help us address that. So.
Yeah, I actually talked to a high school in New Hampshire recently, and they had a young person that was not showing up to their Zoom meetings at all. And so they reached out to the family to find out what was going on. And it turns out he was insecure about both the way he looks and the way his voice sounds, because they had also given the option to not have your camera on. So they gave him the option to come and only participate in the class, and he shows up every day and participates. So that could have been interpreted as he's not interested in the content, but what it really was were these other barriers that to engagement for him.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I want to say comes from one of our comments here. I'm a special education teacher, and sometimes I get pushback from other teachers because this is the approach I'm taking naturally, right? This is the approach the teacher is taking naturally. And I think UDL can actually, this came up in the para webinar we did yesterday, I think UDL can be that great outside tool that you can use to engage conversation. So in that case, you know, Melissa, if you were the teacher, instead of saying, I, Amanda, think the student needs this, I can say, oh, UDL, which is research-based, recommends we do this. What do you think? And so instead of like directly being in contact, conflict, UDL can become a way to talk about things on a really research-based level, and it can become a tool for communication.
Yeah. And also that focus in on that goal. So if the complaint is, why are you giving them so many routes, then the question can be, okay, so what's the goal of this lesson? And then we can find a route that works for the student that also helps them to achieve that goal. So it might even be a powerful way to get that co-teaching relationship focused in on the design and on the goal.
Great.
All right, so we are going to, we've got about 50 minutes. We'll probably just watch a portion of this video, but what we get a lot of questions about is, what does UDL look like in practice? And we got a little extra money together and did a special project where we filmed a classroom in New Hampshire, and they doing a UDL lesson. So this person has been doing UDL for a couple years, so a little new to UDL, but still has been trying to infuse UDL into the lesson. This is the only video we have so far. My dream is one day we're going to have videos of middle schools and high schools and CTE classrooms, but for now we have a middle school English language classroom, and the goal is for them is to present an oral presentation. So what I'll ask you to look for while we watch this little video is look for, what do you think the goal is? Where do you see students' variability? Where do you see barriers? And where do you see the teacher offering multiple means of representation, engagement, and action and expression? And if you want to use that graphic organizer, this Looking for UDL graphic organizer, that should be, I believe, in your handouts. If you want to open that up, make a copy of it, and you can type into it. So without further ado, let's watch a little bit about Merrimack Middle School, and we'll watch about 4 or 5 minutes, Amanda.
Okay, great.
I hope the sound comes through. Let me know.
All right, so our building we're working on today. You got this, I believe, out, right? We're doing the 5-minute quick write about your feelings on public speaking in general, okay?
So we've done a project last quarter that they had to present for and speak publicly to a larger group. And I noticed a lot of kids were visibly anxious and afraid up there. So I thought, I have some time at the end of the year. Why not do a whole unit on public speaking?
Okay, so you guys can use your notebooks. You can pull up scrap paper up here, or you can type on your phones. Remember, if we're using our phones, it is for that purpose only, okay? And what I'd like you to do is just kind of summarize maybe your initial thought in a sentence and just share it with the person next to you. Okay, go ahead.
I like public speaking. It gives me a chance to like share what I think.
The public speaking unit, last one of the year. Okay, it's going to be kind of quick, but hopefully we can get some good practice in, good exposure. So it kind of leads me into why we're doing public speaking.
This is a huge barrier for a lot of people. People I know, colleagues, even adults, it's very difficult for them to public speak. So I had to think about, okay, what are my expectations and what do I want them to be able to do, and how can I capture that? And what are the different ranges of difficulty and challenge in expressing themselves? So whether or not it's to a small group or just to me by myself, or not even, if that's like outside the box and not even give it to people, but put it on a video.
Okay, and I see some groans. So in order to eliminate those groans and to eliminate those fears, we are going to get some goals that are geared towards us, right? Our individual needs, what we need to feel more comfortable going into this. So I have the following goals posted around the room. Think about your response to the bell ringer and comfort level with public speaking. Choose a goal that is, and I'm going to say realistic, yet challenging, something you can strive towards. And then you're gonna pull one of the tabs. So if you look around the room, I have these things posted, right? The first one, by the end of this unit, I will be able to deliver a speech in front of the whole class. That's kind of like that big step, big goal. Next one, by the end of the unit, I will be able to deliver a speech in front of a partner or a small group. The third one, by the end of this unit, I will be able to deliver a speech to Mr. Costa. That is over on my chair. If you want to do that, you can pull a tab. So that's basically saying you're not comfortable in front of peers, but maybe in front of me you are. Then by the end of this unit, I will be able to deliver a speech on video. If you're not comfortable delivering a speech to people, right? If we're groaning about giving a speech publicly, you know, things are changing nowadays. We have more technology. It could be possible to do a webinar, right, where you're giving a speech to people electronically. So if you want to do that one, you can come grab a tablet.
Yeah, because I small. You can see it. You can see this. The group. I just small group. I just small group. Yeah, it's interesting for a smaller group. Yeah.
The goal of the lesson was to more or less zoom into tone and word choice, giving a speech, and considering the audience and, you know, what tone and what word choice is going to best reach that audience. Alrighty, I said.
All right, so I'll stop it there. But I like that he told us the goal, or at the end there, right? He said the goal is to zoom in on tone and word choice. So when he gave them those options around who they're going to give it to or how they're going to give it, he wasn't reducing the rigor of that goal. The goal is tone and word choice. So you can do it on a video, you can do it in front of people, and that still doesn't reduce the rigor of that goal, because he was being thoughtful about the goal when he made the options.
We had weigh in, Melissa, that they really appreciate that pull the tab, you know, example.
Oh yeah, I think about that when I was in college. You get like the room shares, right? You pull the tabs. Remember those?
Is there a link where people can watch the whole video, Melissa? I don't know if we share that video.
The video is the whole video is actually embedded in that slide, so they can watch it from there.
From the Bitly.
Yeah, through the Bitly. And in addition, I'm just checking the time here. There's another video that folks can watch on their own and listen for attributes of expert learning, because these are students reflecting upon that lesson and kind of what worked for them, what didn't work for them. And so I wanted to spend just our last few minutes just thinking about expert learning. So the goal of all of these choices and all of these options to remove barriers are to help students become expert learners. So part of the choice process is having students make a choice to make a poster, to make a video, to write an essay, is to then have them self-reflect on what worked for them in that process. How are they different as a learner? Same as we ask teachers to reflect on, now that you've designed this way, how are you different as a designer? Well, we'd ask students, how are you different as a learner? What do you know more about yourself and how you do your best learning after making those choices? And you wouldn't have that opportunity if there wasn't more than one way to do it. You wouldn't have the opportunity to think about, why did that work for me and the other thing didn't work for me? So just wanted to give people a second to ask themselves, looking at that expert learner guideline, ask yourself, when have you been an expert learner and what does that look like? And what do you expect from your students in terms of expert learning? I know you mentioned a little bit about this before, Amanda, but I don't know if you want to expound on, like, what are you thinking about expert learning looking like in a CTE classroom?
Yeah, I think expert learning can look different. When I think of an expert CTE learner, I think of someone who has the ability to really go out and advocate for themselves in an internship or on a work-based learning site, so they can go and demonstrate their skills independent of the teacher, right, and outside of the classroom. That's what I really think of as an expert learner.
Nice.
We did have a question, Melissa, for you on when do we stop offering options? I narrowed the question down a lot, but I thought maybe that was something you might want to help us think about. Could it be overwhelming for a student if we ask, we offer options and options?
Oh, I understand. how do we know how many options are too many options?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. I think you start really slow, first of all. My colleague Bill describes it as like a game of leapfrog with your students. So you jump over the students and learn how to offer 1 or 2 options, and then it's going to take them a minute to figure out how to choose options. And then they jump over you. Okay, so now they know how to choose between 2. Maybe we do 3. And then, by the time you're at the end of the leapfrog game, maybe we're at that point where they're saying, you know what, I'd rather do it this way. And this is the reasons why I think I can still meet that goal by doing it this way. But I think you definitely start small. I wouldn't start with 5 options. The other thing that often we'll hear, it's a poor teacher in Massachusetts, the middle of Massachusetts, spent a lot of time making 3 options and just building in all these scaffolds for students to make a video as opposed to writing an essay on their research. And she was so disheartened because all the students still chose to do the essay. And I think that happens at first because they don't trust themselves, they don't trust it. This is what I've always done. So it takes a little bit of cajoling and pushing to help students kind of think out of the box and do things that are different from what schools always look like for them. And this particular teacher was a high school teacher. So if they've been having only one way to do everything their whole school career, and then they land in your class and you're giving them options, sometimes they'll a little bit of getting used to get up to that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Melissa. I was going to say that too, is, take students some time to get used to having options. I feel like so often students just aren't used to it in other classrooms and don't have that experience. So it's going to take them a little time to get used to it. One more question that came up was, do you ever run into students complaining that if you give a poster and an essay, you're grading the posters easier, or, anything like
that? Well, yeah, something similar. I had an art teacher say, well, if I have them more than one way to do this, I'm going to have to develop 3 rubrics. And I think that's where people sometimes go wrong. The rubric is depending on the option. If you have to do a rubric, you are assessing 3 different goals. So, but that means you're going to have to take extraneous things on that rubrics. Spelling might not go on the rubric if your goal is content. You have one rubric, and let's say that you need to demonstrate that you understand the 5 steps to preparing the chemicals and the materials for dyeing hair. So in that rubric, let's say you have to describe detail, you have to tell me the tool, and be very specific about that rubric, and that by trying it other means. Can you still hear me, Amanda?
You're really breaking up, Melissa. Now I can hear you a little better, but what I heard you saying something about offering different means, but really making sure that, again, keeping the goal in mind, right? That's what I heard you saying.
Yes. Yeah, and everything blank for a second, so I was a little confused. But am I back?
You're back.
Okay. Yes, just one that goal, and if the rubric can be quite rigorous for everything. So if it's hair dyeing and it's a poster and it's an essay, the rubric can have each step, like what tools you're going to use, explain to me what background knowledge you'll need. So it can be really a rigorous rubric, and this is what each of those things I'm assessing for each of those things, and they're equally rigorous.
Got it.
Any other questions? Oh, I lost one.
Well, we did have a question. Folks are wondering about technology, but I think that it's important to note that even in that example we watched in the video, the options don't always have to do with technology, right?
That's true. Hold on one second. I'm going to actually stop sharing my webcam because that's what this thing told me to do, but you can still hear me, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, it said that would help stabilize the internet connection if I stopped. So yes, and a lot of people wonder about how can I do UDL without technology? And UDL is actually can be done. You can speak something, or you can write something. Can be done all without technology.
Okay, I think we're at a minute left, Melissa, so it might be good if folks had questions, they could throw them in the chat. But did you want to just wrap us up with this slide?
Sure. This last slide is our CAST professional learning. So if you're interested in getting in contact with us for your context, so if you're a principal of a school or you have a small team you want CAST to come out to, or you want us to do webinars for your specific context, then just contact Maddie there and she will get you going.
Great.
Did my screen go away too?
No, you're there. We see it. I'm just reading through to see if we have any other questions. So other than that, I guess so we've reached the time, and it was wonderful to have you all here, and we have 2 more webinars, so tune in.
All right, thank you everyone for attending our webinar, and this recorded video and the handouts will be on our website within 24 hours, and we hope you join us for the next 2 webinars. Thank you, Amanda and Melissa, for presenting, and everyone have a great weekend.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Bye.